There is the statement that came yesterday morning. David Tepper, just one day removed from loudly shouting an F-bomb on his way out of the locker room after the 17-10 loss to the Titans, relieves Frank Reich of his duties effective immediately. Special teams coordinator Chris Tabor serves as the interim head coach. Jim Caldwell will be a special advisor to offensive coordinator Thomas Brown. I was surprised but not surprised. Last Sunday, week 11, Jay Glazer said on Fox's pregame show that Frank Reich is on the hottest seat right now in the NFL, and 8 days later, he's gone. I thought he would at least wait until the end of the season. You know, we went 43 years without a coach being fired during his first year on the job. Pete McCulley of the 49ers was fired into the 1978 season, I think 9 games in. And Bobby Petrino quit, walked away, left in 2007 with the Falcons, so that doesn't count. So it went 43 years before Urban Meyer, who absolutely positively deserved to be fired. He was completely unfit, out of his element, and he didn't even know it, and he should have in Jacksonville. And then last year, 2 for 2, Nathaniel Hackett, unfit, out of his element, never should have been the head coach of the Broncos. He's gone. Now this year, Frank Reich, working for one of the most controlling and involved and meddling owners in all of sports, he doesn't even get to finish the season. Fired during a season for the second straight year by 2 of the owners that the good owners look at and say, man, I'm glad those guys are in the league. And that's how it goes. There are owners out there who know what they're doing, Charean. And when they see David Tepper doing David Tepper things, they just kind of smile inwardly and say, I'm glad I'm competing against him.
Yeah, 12 years, Mike. The last 12 years, we've had 12 coaches who have been fired after 1 year or less. And it's billionaires playing fantasy football is basically what it is. And they have no clue about what they're doing, some of these guys. And you're right, they want to keep them in the league. I think there are people who wanted to keep Dan Snyder in the league because they knew the Commanders were going to be bad every single year that they had him as the owner. And they were. So absolutely, there are owners that these other guys want to keep in the league just for that reason.
Yeah, it's funny. Since we're in a year where Tommy DeVito, the character in Goodfellas played by Joe Pesci, has become relevant to the NFL, that scene with Billy Bats, keep him here, keep him here, keep him here. That's what some of the owners are saying about David Tepper. Keep him here. Keep him here. Yes, keep Dan Snyder here. And you're right. Money. You're right. We're happy to have somebody else who's sitting at the table with the appropriate financial credentials, and we like the fact that this person doesn't know what they're doing and isn't willing to take a hard look at himself and understand, I need to make some changes. I mean, look, Jimmy Haslam, I don't know, is Jimmy Haslam finally figuring it out? Well, he's not firing somebody every other year, so maybe he is. But yeah, somebody was telling me, oh yeah, Jimmy Haslam's finally started to figure it out. Wait a minute, he's the guy that gave Deshaun Watson that ridiculous contract. Is he the guy who's figured it out? Or is he as desperate now as he's always been? And Haslam's a little bit different than Tepper. Tepper's completely and totally self-made in that his billions came from his efforts. Haslam was part of the family business of truck stops, and it became a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, et cetera, et cetera. But still, people who are part of a business that is ridiculously successful financially, there's a hubris that comes into play. I watch football. I understand the game. I can figure it out. I could own a team, and I would know exactly how to give my coaching staff and my general manager and everyone in football operations the support necessary, because I would say the right thing at the right time, ask the right question at the right time, and I'll be the difference. I'll be the difference. I'll supplement their abilities with my business savvy, with my brilliance developed in other areas altogether, but it's transferable, and I'm going to make it work. And I feel like he's the guy right now who is the ultimate example, in a bad way, of that mindset. I've made nearly $20 billion elsewhere. I've been successful at everything I've ever done. I live a charmed life, and I'm going to sprinkle some of that charm on a football team, and I'm going to keep sprinkling and keep sprinkling and keep sprinkling. And, it's like this salt shaker where they loosen the top. I'm going to dump the whole thing on it. And you fire Matt Rule, you fire Frank Reich, and good luck hiring someone who is viable and who has options, Charean. Yeah, it's only one of 32 jobs, but who's going to want that job if they can choose between working for a good owner and working for an owner who's way too involved? He's going to have a hard time making a great hire this time around, unless he's willing to ridiculously overspend.
Well, think about this, Mike. A year ago, we were talking about the Houston Texans as the most dysfunctional franchise in all of sports. Cal McNair had ended up firing 2 coaches in 1 year, 3 in a row, but 2 of them only got 1 year. Now they hired DeMeco Ryans, they got rid of the preacher, and they got a quarterback now. And we're not talking about them as a dysfunctional franchise. We're now talking about the Panthers as perhaps the most dysfunctional franchise in all of sports. I mean, and it goes back to the owner, just like a lot of these things do. He now is on his 6th head coach, counting interim coaches, in 6 years as an owner. They're 30-63 since David Tepper has been the owner of the team. Only the New York Jets have a worse record than the Carolina Panthers since David Tepper became the owner of the Panthers. The other teams love this. And you're right, who are they going to get for a head coach? Anybody who has other options is not going to Carolina. Any coordinator who is a hot commodity, who doesn't get a head coaching job and has only perhaps Carolina to choose from, is going to maybe wait another year. Like Sean Payton did when the Raiders offered him a job. He says, I'm not going to the Raiders. There's no possible way I'm going to the Raiders. Turned the Raiders down, and guess what? Ended up getting the Saints, and it worked out great for him. Jason Garrett turned down the Ravens 1 year. Now, he should have gone to the Ravens probably, but he turned them down. So coordinators do turn down those opportunities, and I think this is one franchise that you're going to turn down if you feel like you're going to get another opportunity next year.
There are 2 kinds of bad owners. There's the bad owner who is way too involved and too impatient and not willing to step back and just be a fan. There's a point as an owner where you just take a step back and behave like a fan and also understand you make all the money too. That's the one thing that separates you from the fans. The rest of them pay the money, you make the money. Otherwise, act like a fan at a certain point. The other bad owner is the one who isn't directly involved, but who has someone that the owner trusts and shouldn't, like Jack Easterby, a.k.a., as you referred to him, the preacher. Somebody who tries to finagle a spot where there's power and there's influence and there's money and no accountability, and whispering to the owner and convincing the owner to do certain things and go a certain way. And to Cal McNair's credit, he snapped out of that spell that Easterby had him under. And now Cal McNair is doing what he should have done all along. Just be a glorified fan. Just let your football people do their job and get out of the way. Your involvement is only going to make it harder. Like, when you've got somebody, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, if you've got a chore that you're doing as a kid and they tell you to just go do it, you just go do it and you go do your best. But if like one of your parents is hovering over your back the whole time that you're doing it, it's going to make it harder. If they're constantly saying, do this, do that, no, stop here, stop. At a certain point, you got to let me do this. You got to let me do this. And I feel like David Tepper won't let his people do their jobs, that he's too involved. He was way too involved in that whole quarterback selection process. And even though no one's ever going to admit it, I firmly believe, I don't know, but I believe that Bryce Young is there because of him. And Bryce Young's another factor here too, Charean, that makes that job potentially less attractive, or it reduces the universe of people who would want it. You're going to have coaches out there, they're going to say, I'm not interested in coaching a 5'10" quarterback. Or they'll act like they are. This is even worse. They'll act like they are. And then when they get there, part of the agenda will be to prove that Bryce Young isn't the guy. We need to go with my guy. Here's what I want. Let's move away from this guy. Let's go with my guy. So that's a wrinkle here that I would suspect David Tepper is completely underestimating. Reliably finding a coach who will happily embrace and develop Bryce Young.
Well, and that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a coach who believes in Bryce Young, probably. But I want to go back to Mike, to the profanity that he had, David Tepper had coming out of the locker room. Not only was it unprofessional, he knew exactly what he was doing when he came out. He knew there were reporters that were going to hear that. He knew what he was doing when he came out of the locker room. They're standing there. You can't miss them when you come out of the locker room. So he knew exactly what he was doing. He said it for a reason. One word, expletive. He said it for a reason, Mike. So, you know, I just don't know who wants to work with David. It's going to take somebody who will be willing to obviously work with David Tepper, who is meddling in it and has to know that. And it's a different kind of meddling than Jerry Jones does as the general manager of the team. And it's going to take, as you said, someone who is going to work with Bryce Young, because he is going to be your quarterback next year. For at least 2 years, Bryce Young is going to be your quarterback. Now, maybe he's going to be a great quarterback. You know, a lot of us, me included, have kind of rushed to judgment on Bryce Young because of what C.J. Stroud has done. Bryce Young may end up being a really good quarterback. I don't think he's ever going to be as good as C.J. Stroud is, but he may end up being a really good quarterback you can win with. I don't think we know that yet, but it is going to take somebody who wants to work with a 5'10" quarterback, and there are coaches out there who aren't willing to do that. They don't think you can win with a 5'10" quarterback.
And see, this is part of the risk that you assume when you make the trade from 9 to 1. You cut the line in front of the other teams that you know are thinking quarterback in the top 5. You know there's going to be a run on quarterbacks. You know your guy is going to have to compare favorably to whoever's taken by the Texans and whoever's taken by the Colts or whoever else ended up in the top 5 taking a quarterback. That's part of the extra pressure on the player. I just don't think these owners, and I think others too in football operations, don't appreciate the extra burden that you put on this kid that is just trying to find his way in the NFL, because you know he's going to feel that extra obligation to justify everything that was given up to go get him. I mean, look, the Bears may end up gift-wrapped with the first overall pick in the draft this year because of this desire to go get Bryce Young. And it's just a problem that the Panthers are going to be dealing with for years. And it may be a situation where David Tepper has to write a gigantic check to get someone to want that job, or go outside the box and hire somebody who otherwise isn't going to have an opportunity to be an NFL head coach, like a Greg Olsen, who kind of threw his hat into the ring. And I guess it makes sense. He's about to get bumped out of the Fox #1 booth by Tom Brady, which is kind of a bad situation all around for Fox and for Greg Olsen. So Greg Olsen would be interested. And, hey, we saw Jeff Saturday come out of nowhere to be the interim coach of the Colts last year. Not that it worked. We haven't seen many outside-the-box permanent hires. And I want to go back to this is a point I haven't seen made yet in the last day, and maybe it's just because I missed it. What happened with Frank Reich, it just underscores the fact that they should have given Steve Wilks a year. Look at what Steve Wilks did with that team last year after Matt Rule was fired. He had those guys playing hard for him. They rallied around him. Give him a year. If you're not going to give the next guy a full year, why not give Steve Wilks 1 year? Why not delay all this by a year? Why'd you have to fire, or at least not hire, Steve Wilks and go with a guy that you fire in less than a year? It just makes it look even more foolish that David Tepper wasn't willing to ride the momentum that Steve Wilks was able to build last season, Charean.
Yeah, you do get that initial bump, and the Raiders got it initially with Antonio Pierce, and now it looks like they're not getting that bump. So maybe that's all it was, but I'm with you, and I thought the same thing when I was sitting here looking at the coaches that they've had under David Tepper. Wilks has been your best guy. You ended up finishing 7-10 last year, which is the most wins that you've had since 2017 when you went 11-5 and the last time you made the playoffs. So 100%, I'm with you. Steve Wilks should have gotten an opportunity to continue as the head coach if you weren't going to keep Frank Reich for a little more than half a season. It just doesn't make any sense. But This is what these guys do. They pay off coaches, and you look at how much they're now paying off coaches in Carolina, and it's a ton of, it's almost as much as Texas A&M. I think they're paying off $70 million now in these two coaches.
They got lucky though with Rule, because Rule landed at Nebraska, and Rule may be making as much or close to it as what he was going to make for Carolina. That was a gift for David Tepper that Nebraska gave Matt Rule a landing spot. So that's, and again, hey, it doesn't matter. They're printing money.
They don't care.
This guy's he's worth close to $20 billion, and you can just sit back. You have to try to not make money as an NFL owner. That's the duality of this. On one hand, from a business standpoint, you're kicking ass. You don't even have to try. The national TV money, you could have an empty stadium and still have plenty of profit every year because of the national TV money. But it's the football side where they get caught up, where ego gets involved. Who's got the biggest yacht, right? Who's doing the most? When they all hang out together, who's the king of the room? Who's the one who's able to strut around with the brand new Super Bowl ring? Or, you know, the budding dynasty like a Clark Hunt, or Robert Kraft with everything he's accomplished in his time as owner of the Patriots. Who's that person? And you mentioned Jerry Jones earlier. I got a ton of respect for Jerry Jones as it relates to his willingness to put the title on his name. They're all meddling to some degree. And a lot of them are doing a good job of covering their tracks. Even the ones that you don't think meddle. Jerry Jones is like, hey, I'm the general manager of the team. Of course I'm meddling. I'm the general manager of the team. And I don't know that an owner would get away with that today. You'd be shouted down immediately by social media and talk radio and TV and us and everywhere else. 1989, there wasn't enough noise. There weren't enough avenues out there for people to say, what the hell is this guy thinking, making himself the GM of the team? And the game's really advanced since then with free agency. Being the GM just used to be, you're drafting. Who you drafting? Who you drafting? That's it. Now it's so much more complicated than that with the salary cap. It's another reason why an owner wouldn't get away with it, but I respect the fact that he puts his name on it, and it's him, and he's not hiding behind anybody else. And firing somebody else for not doing better with the bad decision that the owner made.
Well, and Jerry Jones does have a football background. He did play college football, won a national championship at Arkansas. So he does have the football background as well. And he knows
60s.
What I think in the 60s, Al Green. And he's done a better job, Mike, of listening to his people. Will McClay is so good at what he does, the de facto general manager of the Cowboys, and he listens to Will McClay. And so I think that's really helped Jerry. But there was a point there when he didn't listen to anybody. There was a point when he would have probably drafted Johnny Manziel and would have given up more to get Paxton Lynch and all those things that didn't happen for one reason or another. A couple different reasons those things didn't happen. But I do think he listens more to people around him, which is important for an owner. I don't know that David Tepper does that. I don't know that he listens to the people around him and gets sound advice. I think he's one of those guys, as you said at the beginning, I'm a businessman. I know how to make money. I can manipulate people. I can ask the right questions, and we're going to get it done this way because I know what I'm doing in the business world. That translates to football. Guess what? It doesn't always translate to football.
I know we need to take a break, but I do have one more item of curiosity that we haven't explored. The news right out of the gates was Frank Reich fired. Then later in the day, quarterbacks coach Josh McCown and running backs coach Deuce Staley also fired. And I can't help but wonder, is this a purging of the folks who weren't fully on board with Bryce Young? Is this just, we got to get these guys out of here that wanted C.J. Stroud? If they did. And again, they're never going to admit it. And especially these buyouts get jeopardized if people start chirping about what's really going on. I don't know that there's going to be some Sunday Splash report about how Reich and McCown and Staley all wanted Stroud because they need to keep their mouths shut to get their buyouts. But that was my first thought, that this is anyone here who isn't fully and completely on board with Bryce Young, we need them to be gone. We need them to not be here. And moving forward, we can only have people in this building who are 100% committed to the quarterback that we have and are never mentioning how well the guy we didn't draft is doing.
It's interesting, Mike, because both of those guys have interviewed for head coaching jobs, and we know the flack that the Texans got for Josh McCown for 2 consecutive years of interviewing him. But now suddenly they're in this purge that's going on in Carolina. So it is interesting, and maybe that's the case that those guys were in on wanted C.J. Stroud, and now they're with Bryce Young, and we haven't seen his development quite as quickly as we have with C.J. Stroud. So it's going to be interesting what both of those guys' futures are now, Mike.
Frank Reich gave an interview to the Charlotte Observer yesterday and said, this is probably the final chapter of my NFL journey, and he's accomplished a lot. He won a Super Bowl with the Eagles as offensive coordinator. Ended up getting that Colts head coaching job after Josh McDaniels left Jim Irsay at the altar. Frank Reich's done well for himself, but 2 straight years, 2 not-so-great owners, and Frank Reich's NFL journey is over, and Panthers fans can only wish that David Tepper's NFL journey was over because they're stuck with him. You can't fire the owner, and I feel bad for Panthers fans. I feel bad for the fans of any team where the owner is the problem or a big part of it, and there isn't a damn thing you can do about it. There's no recall vote. There's no board of directors that can oust him. It's one of the arguments I've made in the past that if all these teams were corporations, maybe that would be good, because when you get a bad CEO, you can do something about it if you've got a board of directors and a publicly traded corporation. David Tepper, he's not leaving. And Panthers fans' only alternative is to find a different team to root for. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.